Welcome into Beyond Sunday. My name is Luke, and I am joined by our lead pastor, Ron Sylvia. Dad, appreciate you jumping back on here after we officially have kicked off the Hey God, I Have a Question series.
Yeah, it's great to be here. We're looking forward to this podcast and the ones during this series, just answering questions.
And we've got a lot of them, hundreds of them that we can't possibly get to. But that's what this podcast will be for the next few weeks. And it'll be for answering the ones that don't necessarily get stage time, but are still important, right? And are still ones that are asked widely, but it's hard to really tackle those in a monologue, pastor, preaching setting. So we're going to do that here. Now, kind of the ones that we will get to eventually, but not today, are why are there so many denominations and which one is right? What is the real answer about how God feels about homosexuality?
Ooh, yeah.
God, how can we support government that seems ungodly?
And
I think this is funny because I have no idea which one it's geared toward, which is the sad part. I have no clue.
Yeah.
But also, how do you control your anger and rage? These are all very relatable questions of things that people just everyday people deal with.
Yeah.
And the one that collectively breaks our heart the most is, may I please have a hug?
Yeah. And so many of the questions were heart questions. And that question is kind of like this summary of, I just need a hug. I need to get through this. And so many of the questions were about pain and suffering, and why does God let bad things happen to good people, and where were you, God? And listen, this weekend at the Ocala campus, Jacob is going to be teaching on that question. And you do not want to miss it if that is a question that, and most of us have it at some season and time of our lives. It's an incredible message. And, but I would say that those questions are typically all why questions. It's why, God? Why did you let this happen? What I learned many years ago from some good friends that walked through incredible grief was stay off of the why track when your heart is breaking. Because if you're looking for a why answer and you think the answer is going to make you feel better, that there is no answer that anybody could ever give to a broken heart that will make it feel better. God's not a God of why. Because his ways aren't our ways. His thoughts aren't our thoughts. I mean, he sees the big picture of all history, and he is working his plan. So, there's a great book, too. I just want to mention it. Yeah. Gerald Sitzer wrote a book called A Grace Disguised. And it came out of the pain of a car wreck where he lost his wife, his mother, and his children.
Wow.
And he talks about that why track in that book. It's a great read.
Wow. Well, talking about whys, and as you just said, stay away from the why questions. We're going to start with a why question. This why question that we are starting with for you is, why are there 24 hours in a day? This one's interesting because I don't know if this person was serious. They submit a question just to submit it. Or if they are genuinely curious. Yeah. Why are there 24 hours in a day?
Well, I mean, there was one person who, it said, if you could ask God one question, what would it be? And they said, they wrote it, nothing.
They're
good. So, but this one is like, people think, well, God created time, and therefore God created the day and the night, and that's where we got 24 hours. And it's really not true, because God created the rhythm of time, right? There's day, there's evening, and Genesis talks about that, multiple times. He creates, and it said, and there was evening and there was morning the first day, and then he keeps on going. However, it's actually the Egyptians that created a 24-hour day. Because they did it with the sundial, and with the sundial they measured 10 hours of daylight, and they had an hour for sunset, an hour for the sunrise, so that was 12. And then at night they actually tracked groupings of stars that came out at different hours through the night, and they came up with 12 hours. So it was 12 night, 12 hours a night, 12 hours a day.
You ever wonder what people did without technology? They did things like that.
Yeah.
They went outside and they were looking at the stars and they were like, how can we measure time? And today we're just like, I don't care.
But you know what? On that note, I love those Stargazer apps on your phone that you can walk out into the night sky and hold it up and it shows you where constellations are and where planets are.
There's a ton of them now.
Yeah, that's as close as I get to it.
It's funny that I have a memory of that when I was in either elementary or middle school at Redeemer. So shout out to Redeemer Christian School. When I was there, we did a project of some sort, a constellation project. And I remember at the time, I want to say that the only apps that they really had were optimized for like iPad or something like that. And so we downloaded it on the iPad, you and I did, and went out in the yard and we're looking. That was my first interaction with a constellations app. And then recently we did the same thing on our phones with Harper and Cole, where Harper just wanted to go in the backyard and look at the constellations and stuff. But because some really crazy stuff's been happening with the moon lately in the last, I feel like in the last few months.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of different things. But yeah. So, all right. So that's if you were curious genuinely about 24 hours in a day, there you go. We're going to really sit down on these next questions for the episode. The next one is, how do you know if the person that you are with is right for you? So someone genuinely has this question, and I know that they are not alone in that.
Yeah. And I think for a Christ follower, that's an entirely different question. And I think we bypass something because everybody's like, are they good looking? Are they funny? I mean, do they love me? Will they treat me well? All of that stuff. But bypass all of that and get to the foundational question that Paul laid out in 2 Corinthians 6:14, which basically, before I read it, it's basically, are you dating somebody who is a Christ follower? I mean, that's foundational. That's where it starts. Do they believe what you believe?
Right.
And Paul wrote it this way. He said, don't team up with those who are unbelievers. How can righteousness be a partner with wickedness? And how can light live with darkness? And we don't dig into that, but he was actually saying, don't be unequally yoked with an unbeliever. And a yoke was a farming tool. Yoke went around the necks of oxen, and they'd connect two oxen together, and they would plow a field with them with a yoke around their neck. But if they they yoked with a smaller oxen and a big oxen, their steps would be out of sync. They would wind up choking each other. So Paul was saying, foundationally, are you dating somebody that loves Jesus? If you're not, it doesn't matter how good looking they are. It doesn't matter how suave they are. It's like you've got to, because I have had people all through the years, and even especially in student ministry days, we taught this as foundational when kids are starting to date. But I've had people, say to me, "Oh, I know the Bible says that, but I mean, I'm gonna bring them along and win them to Jesus." And you know how often that happens? Very rarely, because it's easier for somebody to bring you down in your faith than for you to lift somebody up into a faith with Jesus. And so that is this goes into all relationships, actually, because Paul was writing about, like partnerships. I mean, I think about it today in today's context. That also means like a business partnership. If you're going to go into business with somebody who doesn't hold to your values, you're stepping in and they start doing things with money, and you're saying, no, we're going to operate with integrity. And they're going, oh, no, we're going to operate for profit.
Right.
There's that's that same rub. So, how do you know? Well, if somebody asks you out or you're interested in someone, first thing, and I've talked to a lot of people that have done this, they said, yeah, why don't you go to church with me? And you're going to find out real fast where that relationship could possibly go.
And it's not just your spirituality either. Like just because you and another person are a Christ follower doesn't mean you're equally yoked, right?
No.
That doesn't mean that you both are chasing the same things. Because there's a lot of people who say, I'm a Christian, but it goes no further than just I believe in God, right? Now, then there are people who go to church, are in the Word, they serve, they're all in. And it's very different. You're not equally yoked in that sense at all. And I will say this, because in reading this, you might start to, if you're someone that maybe you're in a relationship, maybe you're married. This is the caveat here. You're married to someone who's not a Christ follower. Well, Paul goes on to talk about in Scripture, not long after he says that about being unequally yoked, he goes on to essentially say, don't divorce someone that you are with because they aren't a believer. Because there's people out there who haven't maybe heard this before. And now they're married and they're married to someone that's like, oh, what do I do? So Paul goes on to say, don't divorce them. However, if they want the divorce, then peacefully step away. Because there still is power in Jesus and being a believer, and you still can get you. It does happen, right? You and Mom, you guys weren't equally yoked.
No, we weren't. And that's what I was about ready to say. Thanks for calling me out on that. Wasn't my fault, though. I wasn't a believer. Just kidding. But it really, our story is one that there is hope. I mean, if you're in a relationship right now, in a marriage right now, that you have a spouse that is not a believer, I like Paul encouraged, and what I would encourage you is live Jesus in front of them. I love them and live Jesus in front of them, because that's what Mom did. I mean, she would get up in the morning and have her quiet times, and I was so far from God, I didn't have any interest in any of that.
And a last thing on that, 1 Corinthians 7:12 through 16. Really, I want to just read verse 14 in that real quick. But for the unbelieving husband, basically, you shouldn't divorce him if you are married to someone that is not a Christian. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. So essentially, the encouragement there is keep going. Keep feeding into spiritual leading your family, but also hoping that this all rubs off the habits and the will and the goals of your heart through God. Hopefully it rubs off on them. So,
So in the relationships, if you're not married, make this a foundation for that relationship.
Yes.
Don't go out and continue getting deeper, because I mean, we've said this through the years. And people say, I just want to follow my heart. Your heart is stupid. I mean, Scripture says that, not me.
Right.
And it just, you've got to realize and think through, okay, who is it that God would possibly have for me? Well, he'd have somebody that is in a relationship with him, that loves him. And, that is always the wrestle, because I know today I meet so many people that said, how'd y'all meet? Well, we met online. And that's everywhere, right? And so, I mean, what you and I were talking about it. It's like Christian Mingle.
Yep.
Remember that one? Tender. Tinder?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, don't do Tinder.
We're not giving dating advice on the apps that neither of us have touched in our lives. But so that kind of tackles a little bit of how do you know if they're right for you? It's just asking questions, probing around, asking if they, what, like you said, simply, hey, you want to come sit with me at church on Sunday?
Yeah.
That can give you a good glimpse into what because they'll probably give knee-jerk reaction, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
no,
and
I
it
don't
might
think
be,
so.
they'll come and they'll like what they hear and they'll like what they see and they'll give their lives to Christ. And, so it's, it is, that's where a relationship starts.
Yeah. And then the next one we'll go, I don't know if it's a lighter note, but it's the next question here, and we won't spend too much time on this.
Okay.
The question is, why don't you just kill Satan so there's no more sin? I'm assuming you is God in this instance. Yeah, because they have a question for God, not us. Why don't you just kill Satan so that there is no more sin?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think we had several similar questions to this. Why did you create Satan? And I would say that, first of all, if God did kill Satan, who is the author of lies and sin, but if he did kill Satan, you have to ask the question, what's he going to do with you? Because Scripture says in Romans 3:23 that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We are sinners, and so sin is in us. And I also hear people say, devil's really after me today. And when people say that, I think, do you really think you're that big on his radar?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's not that the devil is after you. It's just that you're a sinner acting on sinful thoughts, so you got to deal with the sin in your own life,
right?
And who is it? Some of the people that listen might remember this. There was a guy when I was growing up called Flip Wilson, and he was a comedian, and his famous line was, "The devil made me do it," and a lot of people believe that,
right?
But he doesn't.
Yeah, no. You, like you said, where do you think you are on the hierarchy that Satan is singling you out specifically? It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but also there's so much sin in the world that honestly, a lot of time it feels like Satan doesn't even need to do anything at all because we're at each other's throats, disagreeing about everything. We're, more broken as far as on what we believe as a nation than we've ever been and as a world likely. And so, that's kind of the question there. Now here's where we're going to sit again here. And the first one of these questions is, if we go to heaven, will we be reunited with our loved ones?
Yeah, and there was a lot of questions about heaven. And I want to say this at the onset. One weekend of this series, I'm going to sit down on what happens after we die and answer a lot of questions, but these are all the ones we got were like relationship questions. It was, will my parents know me in heaven? Is my dog going to be in heaven? Will there be marriage in heaven? And there's so many relational questions, because I think there's a fallacy floating out there that when we go to heaven, there's no gender. Everybody's like this, floating cherub. And you get a new body so nobody recognizes you, and you get a new house, and it's like a whole new world. And I think that would really be cruel.
Right.
Because when you think about what is our resurrected body, what is the new body that we receive, because Paul said there's a separation that takes place, and he said it's absent from the body, present with the Lord, and in that place, these are our. I had a friend years back that used to say, your bodies are just your earth suits, and God lets you live in this, but this is not who you are.
Right.
And so when we die and this body goes in the ground or gets cremated, that's another question about what about cremation? But that is at that point you get a new body in heaven, and people have said, what does it look like? And you can look at John 20, where Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, came back and was on the seashore while the disciples are out fishing, and he spoke to them. They recognized him. So your new body, you're going to be recognizable.
Right.
Your and the resurrected Jesus was there. And the other thing that was really encouraging to me is that Jesus, in his resurrected body, ate. You know what that means? There's going to be food in heaven.
Food, yeah. Come on,
That'll
preach.
Right?
There's also, I thought it was interesting and kind of looking up and researching a little bit for these questions. Talks about Matthew 17, 1-3. Maybe you can provide some context to what's going on. But it talks about that Peter, James, and John recognized Moses and Elijah, even though they had never met them, right?
Yeah.
And I think that also goes to kind of the power of heaven and your soul, and when you are perfectly aligned with God in heaven, is that you will be able to recognize, and you'll know people that you don't really you have no reason to know who they are.
That's a great point, because it's like, think about it in heaven. You think about it, well, I just want to be with my friends. Dude, you get to hang out with Peter.
Right.
And and Paul,
and you're going to know who they are.
And you're going to recognize
you might call them by name. Who knows? Because you recognize.
Because everybody have a name tag.
Name tags. Yeah. There's a pivotal everywhere. Yeah. But I thought that was super interesting.
That is. And it's, but people have asked, will my parents recognize me? Will my family recognize me? Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then people have said, what about my spouse? I mean, will we be married in heaven? And the sad news is no, there is no marriage in heaven. The marriage that heaven will be talking about, the bride and the bridegroom, Jesus and us, the church. That's the marriage, that relationship. But in heaven, but here's the thing. The person that you did life with, like for Mom and I, over 40 years, she's my closest friend, and we're gonna pick that relationship up right where it was. It's not like you forget. Some people have thought, well, your memory's wiped out and you start all new, and no, because God built the entire scriptures are all about a relationship, and so I think. When we think about heaven, you're picking up where you left off. And the great thing about that is you're going to pick up with people that you had some division with, that there was hatred, there were things said, we can't forgive them. That when you get to heaven, that is all sin and it's gone.
Right.
So you're going to pick up with them where you left off. And and when you think about the way relationships play out in heaven, man, it is going to be the way God intended it to be from the start.
Yeah, and I think that there's comfort to be found, but also just it is incredible to think about that heaven is the best of all of us because God is there, and like. All of the like you said, the people you were at odds with, but also just your friends, where your friends you have disagreements with all the time. You guys might not see eye to eye. Coworkers, like we all know that to be true. We all have different opinions, and we all we let it get to us maybe. And then in heaven, it's just like everything is perfect. But now the real question, I don't mind this question doesn't really matter to me much. I don't have a dog.
You have a cat.
I also don't care.
Let's talk about your cat. I
don't care where the cat's going, to be honest with you. Is my dog in heaven was one of the questions.
Yeah, and I think, I'm not, we tried animals, right, growing up. We really did.
The nail in the coffin was a Chihuahua, by the way.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jacob for bringing that into the house.
It was a high-strung Chihuahua that we needed to put on medication. And I'm thinking, do we need to get this dog counseling too?
We did.
But
should have.
But anyhow, because I know the bond between people and their pets is, they're family.
Yeah.
You feel their heartbreak. And, and I've heard people say through the years, well, there's no animals in heaven because they don't have a soul. And Jesus didn't die for animals. And I hear all of that.
Yeah.
But I had a seminary professor, Dr. Uri, who said, to those of you who believe that, I want to ask you, when Jesus comes back in Revelation, what is he riding?
Right. A horse.
A white horse. And because he had a ferret that he loved that died. And he said, I'm going to see my ferret in heaven.
That's so funny.
But we'll probably touch on some of that stuff too in that message, just kind of unpack more of it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, there's a lot that you to unpack there too. Because it's like, animals were part of the creation.
Yeah.
Like clearly there's a reason for them. Mm-hmm. And dogs have played their part and being companions and all of that. So yeah, that's super interesting.
And talking about Jesus coming back.
Yeah.
That was another question that was asked multiple times. When is Jesus coming back?
Yeah.
And I would say to that, here's a simple answer. Even Jesus doesn't know when Jesus is coming back.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. He said in Scripture, only the Father knows. And so why would you think that we would know? Mm-hmm. There was a guy who wrote a book when I was in seminary. It was called 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988.
That's so funny.
And it was a hot book until 1989.
Right, yeah.
Right? And then he changed it. Oh, I made a mistake. 89 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1989.
He did that?
Yeah. Yeah. He kept riding that train, man.
Wow. Yeah, I guess. So those are all the questions that we really wanted to tackle today. Mm-hmm. Don't want to do too many. We don't want to overload our listeners with too much or ourselves emotionally with too much. There's a lot here. But we will continue. Once again, I'll go ahead and say it again. In the coming weeks, we will tackle why are there so many denominations? Which one's right? What is the real answer about how God feels about homosexuality? How can we support a government that seems ungodly? And how do you control your anger and rage? And then, may I please have a hug? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
So if you ever need a hug, let me know. Big hugger here. So, all right, that'll do it for us today. I appreciate you hopping on here with us, and hopefully you guys got some insight into this, encouragement, hopefully, if nothing else.
Can I hit this before you close it out? Mm-hmm. Do not miss this Sunday at the Ocala campus, Southwest or Lady Lake.
Right.
And you're going to get the message on why does God allow suffering. Don't miss it.
Also, if you're at Middleton campus, don't miss that either.
You can go too, Middleton. Glad you're tuning in. Yeah. But the truth is... we love you.
But are you in Middleton?
I am. I'm going to be in Middleton this week.
So there you go. I'll give you
a hug.
There you go.
Middleton.
All right. Okay, guys. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We will catch you guys next time. See ya.